Hello, everybody, and welcome to Firebase After Hours. So today we have a very special episode because we have two people that are going to be streaming with us today who have done this never before. So it's going to be the first time ever that they're going to be in their respective roles. And I'm super excited to bring them on. But before we get into it, you know the drill. This is a public live stream and is live on the internet. So I ask everybody to be nice to each other. We can use the live chat, so you can ask us questions, and we will answer those questions. But please be civil and don't call each other or us names, and then everything will be fine. So in a moment, we will have the first premiere moment on this live stream because we will bring in my co-host. And this time around, it is not my favorite co-host, Noe, but is my favorite co-host, Luke. And here he is. Hey, Luke, how's it going?
It's going well. I do like that you said, let's all be nice to each other. And then you said, I'm going to bring in not my favorite co-host. Just a very quick night and day switch on that one for me. But no, so this is going to be fun. I'm really excited. I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, really excited for what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so you've been on the stream before, but should I say on the receiving end? But you've been a guest, right?
Yeah, I've been a guest twice and survived the hot seat both of those times, but really excited to just be a part of the conversation today and see cool stuff.
Yeah. So did you say SQL stuff? Or did I miss you?
Oh, man, that would be so great if I had done that intentionally. But yes, see cool stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to see how the transcription plays that out.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well. So, and here is a fair warning for all our viewers. I am a big fan of puns and dad jokes, so please be warned.
Yeah, as a father, also a requirement for me as well.
Yep. You need to go through a training. So, with all of that out of the way, let's bring in our guests, actually. And here they are. Here are Marissa and Ashish. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
So Marissa, you just told me that this is the first time that you are on Firebase After Hours, and I was so surprised because I thought you had been on the show before, but then you told me you did a video, and that was what I was confused by, right? So can you tell us which video that was?
Yes, so as part of the conference season, Google I/O, I did a talk on SQL Connect that was pre-recorded. That was in April, that was 7 minutes, which is way harder than an hour and a half, as you know. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
You're not, but I absolutely feel that way. I absolutely feel that 7 minutes can be way harder than an hour and a half because there's so much investment and effort that goes into those well done, highly polished videos. Yeah. And your video was terrific.
Thank you. You mentioned investment, and I just have to say that one of the investments I made was I got a late in the game comment from Peter saying, the way to really do your slides for these talks is to use Keynote and here's a 40-minute presentation I gave on how to use Keynote better and how to do live coding with Keynote so that each character comes in. And so I did do it. I learned how to use Keynote, and it was really good animations, and especially for sort of pseudo coding. But yeah, that was one of the late nights. So for this, I prepared, basically just a little bit to make up for that talk. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I thought when you said investment, you were going to pitch the app that you.
Oh yeah, for that talk.
Wasn't it an emoji stock exchange?
Yeah, it was a stock trading app.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we're going to talk about Realtime, and financial applications are one of the best use cases, clearest use cases for live data. So yeah, we built a stock trading platform for Cloud Next.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
Cool. And Ashish, you've been on the show before, I think, right?
Yeah, I've been on this one once before. I think we were talking about Kotlin SDKs and Firebase SQL Connect.
Yeah.
That didn't.
So how long have you been on the Firebase team, and what did you do before?
I've been on the Firebase team almost 4 years now. All of my time at Google.
Hmm.
I've been on the Data Connect team almost all of it. I started at FCM and then went over to Data Connect, which is now called SQL Connect.
Yeah.
Marissa's going to talk about that.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. So when you last were on, it was Firebase Data Connect, and yeah, I'm curious why the name change. I always in my mind, Data Connect was had this idea of, maybe in the future, it's not just going to be this one data source that we're going to connect to, but maybe others. So yeah, I'm curious what the name change means.
Yeah, that's a great lead in. I think, yeah, the original name was, I think, technically correct, which is the best kind of correct, right? But it was also really, it was really broad. I think that was the main, there was actually feedback and research that we've done, feedback from customers that people didn't know that Firebase had a SQL solution, and they thought Data Connect was maybe related to something with Firestore, some sort of middleware for BigQuery. It was really, the message was lost. And it is true that we, when the product was first conceived, I would say had a more ambitious charter of possibly connecting lots and lots of data sources. That isn't gone, but we're really trying to focus on Postgres and SQL before expanding. So we felt like this name was just a better signal of the value we provide. Yeah, so that's and we hope to be more, more discoverable, just more accurate. So yeah, that's the main reason. SQL is pretty popular. So yeah.
Yeah, still, right? I mean, like we probably all had to learn SQL at uni or maybe even at school, right? So I definitely learned SQL at uni.
Yeah,
How about you?
SQL is. I didn't learn it at school because I don't have a computer science degree, so that's me sneaking in under the radar there. But yeah, it was obviously the first database that just about everybody learns, and even from the Firebase perspective, it's something we've just always had a request for. People always want to use it because it is just so popular and so universally useful.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely an uphill. Like we're on our team. We're facing a lot of, let's just get into it, like with LLMs, there's a lot of training on Firebase equals NoSQL. Like that message is loud and clear. So we have kind of an uphill battle to say like Firebase has SQL. It's still sometimes you ask, you're like, does Firebase have SQL? They're like, no, Firebase has NoSQL. So
yeah, and no,
I
mean, like it has it, and it also doesn't have it, right? So
yeah. Well, what do you mean, Peter?
I mean, like you can use SQL and you can not use SQL. That's what I mean.
I see. Yeah, I thought you were gonna like one other thing I wanted to mention with the rebrand is because you mentioned like, hey, has the product changed at all? And one of the big things, like with the rebrand, isn't purely just a name change. We also launched at the same time native SQL support. So I don't know if all the viewers know, but at launch, Data Connect, it uses, you predefine queries and schema. And we chose as a team to use GraphQL syntax for that. We thought we love the type safety and wanted to use something open, like an open standard. But and there's many people that like that, but we found that it's a little bit more GraphQL is a little bit more of a red herring for some people. Like they see it and get distracted by that and think that the product is different than it is and that it uses GraphQL queries on the client or makes certain assumptions. And it's really more of an implementation detail. So we want to lean more into sort of native Postgres ways of doing things. And one of the first features in that vein is the native SQL queries, which Ashish is going to demo later. So you can write raw SQL now inside of Data Connect, and it's really useful for complicated statements or, Postgres extensions or things that are just awkward to do or impossible to do in GraphQL. So yeah, we also have native SQL support with the name change.
Yeah, that's very cool. I know there are just so many people who are dedicated to using SQL at all times and wouldn't even consider a NoSQL database. Before we dive into that, can you sort of give your overview of NoSQL versus SQL and when someone might use one versus the other? Because I know for us, we know our full product suite with all of the different Firebase products, and we've got Firestore and the Realtime database, and we've got SQL Connect. Can you walk people through what are the differences? Why might you choose one versus the other in your mind?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the most obvious thing to talk about is that with SQL, you have much more structured data, right? And so if there's a lot of complex relationships, thinking of like an e-commerce store with customers and with orders, it's probably a better fit for SQL. Now, there are 10 years of videos talking about how to make that work with Firestore, that we've all been part of. So I don't want to, but really if you look at anything with relational, that's what it is, right? It's a relational database. Anything with complex relationships is probably better served by SQL. That being said, we're going to talk about real-time today. I think that the classic Google thing of, say, chat apps or things with looser structure that also need to be super fast, NoSQL can be a better solution. And NoSQL is very flexible and forgiving. And so if you're vibe coding something and you're not really sure what the shape of your data is going to look like, it's definitely easier to get started and more forgiving. So SQL, you have to do more upfront work. And as Firebase making a SQL product, that's been a little bit kind of hard to balance, is that upfront work that we're maybe not used to assigning to developers about thinking through their app structure. We kind of have to do, and we're still figuring out the right way to do SQL in a Firebase way.
How do you do that? Because with Firestore, with the real-time database, with anything we've had previously, it was basically you just throw whatever it is into the database, and as long as there's a collection or a path that it can go into, it doesn't. Well, you can set it up to do some validation, but most of the time you can just drop it right in without getting any errors. How have you balanced that so far?
I think the most easy answer is before you have real production data, it's still very easy to change. And we have schema migration tooling and schema migration API that help with that and give helpful warnings around what the consequences are of different actions. We also have tons of, I would say, it's hard not to talk about agent skills. And, but that's a big part of it. I think agents can be super helpful in making schema changes now. We have local tooling for validation of those changes for when you are in production. But yeah, it's definitely there is a cost to that structure, I guess, in complexity.
It's the constant developer, it depends, right? There are trade-offs to every decision, and I was just looking to get your take on when to choose one versus the other. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you're vibe coding, you're trying to move quickly, you don't even know what your structure is going to look like. You don't have any idea. Maybe it's still good to start with Firestore. And then once you're yep, highly relational data, this depends on this, maybe I want to
but you're asking the SQL PM, so maybe get Tyler back on here. He'll give you there's certainly a lot of use cases still for NoSQL.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how about we do a demo? I think Ashish, you've prepared something. Can we take a look at the real-time feature in real time.
Yeah, sure. So I worked on a demo, and I realized the demo and explaining the demo was very complex. So I ended up like wipe coding, hopefully a simpler demo in the last hour and a half or so.
Oh, nice.
So this is kind of interesting. I used we have an internal version of anti-gravity, but I've used that out here, and Firebase agent skills. It's wipe coded the whole thing for me, right from defining all of SQL Connect schemas, queries, and also the SwiftUI app. It as part of that, it uses our Swift SDK, SQL Connect Swift SDK. So the use case here is very simple. So this is seeing my screen, right?
Yep. You're on.
Yeah. So the use case is very simple in this demo, and I'll show you the slightly complex demo after this too. But so like Marissa mentioned, we have real-time queries now. What does that mean is like you can take a SQL query, and with the native SQL support now, we are able to make any SQL query real-time. So you define your SQL query, and you add certain annotations on it, and that makes it real-time. So the annotations are basically telling you at what triggers this query or what triggers updates for this query. We'll look at it later. We'll look at the code a little later, but that makes the query real time. Your SQL can be pretty complex if you want it to be, and we'll see in the second example, like an example of something that's pretty complex.
And what was required before this? Did you need to set up a separate server with WebSockets in order to get that real-time aspect hooked up? Or what's the change recently?
Are you asking specifically about SQL Connect or in general?
The real-time aspect for SQL Connect, yeah.
For SQL Connect, the real-time aspect, so like Marissa mentioned, we were originally GraphQL. So you needed to be you needed to be GraphQL, and you had to define your queries in there. We started there, and then as we added native SQL support, we were able to carry forward that same real-time support into SQL queries.
Got it. If I had wanted real-time before this recent launch, though, of the real-time functionality, if I had wanted to do that as a developer, my app needed real-time, would I have had to create that on my own? Would I have had to do some long polling? Would I have had to set up a server side? What would I have had to do?
Yeah, I think real-time on SQL is very complex, firstly. Yeah. So it's not trivial. If you had to do it, you would have had to do all of the conditional checking, WebSocket stuff, everything on your own, or use something like Firestore, which has real-time built in. But you would still need to tell Firestore what to republish or push down to users.
Yeah, and we keep saying the word real-time. Can we maybe define that real quick, just so that everybody knows what we mean by real-time?
I think in SQL Connect's world, real-time for us means queries that will get automatically updated for you, and as data changes. As data that impacts the query changes, those queries get updated automatically. As a developer, your app will subscribe to a real-time query, and the query data will keep getting updated without you needing to do much.
Yeah, like a push versus pull kind of concept, yes. Right?
So the server keeps pushing data down to you as the data changes.
Very cool.
Yeah, there is. We're getting into it. I feel like there's a lot of ways of delivering on real time. One of the most common ways, like in the market, especially in SQL, because it's hard in SQL because a query could join different tables together, and it's really hard for. So a lot of real-time systems use change data capture or Postgres. In Postgres, it's like write-ahead logging. You're basically watching the data change, but it's really hard to connect like table rows and columns changing to like who's listening for that data. Like there's just no, as my engineers reminded me, it's a very complex engineering problem. Like reverse query matching is just, it's hard. And so there's always, like you mentioned earlier, there's always trade-offs. If you're just like listening to all database events, sometimes, you can send that back to the client and they have to sort of sort it out. I like to think of it as like a metaphor is almost like, queries are like ordering at a restaurant, and change data capture is just like people in the kitchen just yelling like, I'm chopping tomatoes. And you're like supposed to figure out like, is that my salad? Like,
That's really terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific.
So like we like what we're doing is more like, hey, now I'm gonna have to live finish this metaphor, which I don't know if I can. But I guess ours is more like, based on the order. Like, hey, if anything changes about this specific order, make sure we send it to the table. And we sort of don't care about the back of the house as much. And the mechanism that, like, when I think when Ashish shows the code, it's a little easier. But the way we're doing this in a way that was possible, I guess, like in a way that we could do as our first version of Realtime, is by specifying conditions that the query should be refreshed. Firestore does a lot of this automatically, but it's also a simpler, we kind of own the whole stack, and it was built with that in mind, and it's NoSQL, so it was a little simpler. But we have you sort of tell us what data changes you care about. And that also is very efficient. Like, you won't have overly reactive queries, because you can just say, hey, there's this huge query with lots of different data for my homepage.
Yeah.
But just be sure that, like, when this piece changes, like when a new article is added, so that mutation occurs, that's the thing I want to trigger a refresh. And so you as the developer can specify which changes to the database you care about. But the signal you use for us is actually mutations. It's not the data itself. It's like the layer we sort of control. So yeah, it's at first when we talked about going to market with this, we were like, oh, it's kind of manual. But in developer world, manual is sometimes good. It's actually like precise. It's control, and especially when you have things that are directly correlated with cost and app efficiency, control can be really good. And hey, who cares about manual anymore when agents can help? So I think that's a really creative solution, and I'm excited to have more people see it and use it and give us feedback. So I'm glad we're demoing it today. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, to lean into the kitchen metaphors, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see it.
Okay. So this is a very simple task list app. It's a project management app, and as part of which you create tasks. I have 2 different users logged in on 2 different iPhone simulators. And what we're going to see is, like, as tasks are added or their status is changed, the task list should automatically refresh for the other user. What am I going to write? Some Swift code. So I added the task on the right simulator. My left one got refreshed automatically. I can change the status of a task, and it gets updated on both screens.
That's almost faster than Firestore.
It's running on my emulator.
That's Fire SQL. Sorry.
Yeah, Fire SQL has some fire right there. Wow.
Okay. And same way, right? I can keep changing statuses, and the screens get a refresh. So this is a very simple use case. Why don't we take a look at the code behind this, and we'll see what's going on here. So let's take a look at the Swift one first, and then we'll jump into the query definition, actually.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't know if other people's brains are exploding as much as mine, but like, I remember like Firestore's original demo and that feeling so incredible. And I've written the WebSockets code to like do the SQL stuff today, and to the idea of not needing to write all of that and just being able to get this straight out of it is really incredible. So I'm excited to see.
Yep. So we work off a concept called query refs in FireSQL for SQL Connect. And so in this case, there's a get tasks query that I've got a ref for. And as a developer, what I would do is in this view, I would subscribe to that query. And if you're an iOS developer, generally that happens in the on appear or a task. So that's what I've done out here is like I set up a subscription to this query.
And sorry to slow you down here. Can you
Sure.
where is that query defined, or what is the
Sure.
the get tasks query?
So let's step back a little and understand what
Yeah.
the way SQL Connect does things. So with SQL Connect we use declarative schemas and queries. What that means is you declare your schemas and you declare the queries that will act on the schema. So queries and mutations both. So read your data, update your data. Those are declared for you. You can declare them. So in our case, we are going to declare them all in SQL. And I think this is to show the new native SQL feature that we've introduced. So all the queries in this app are SQL. So you declare these queries, and then what SQL Connect does is it takes your schemas and it converts them into database tables and the relationships between them. It will also manage all of the schemas for you. So if you make changes to fields, add a field, remove it, it's handling the migration for you.
Wait, I need you to pause there because that is trippy to me. So if I change my code, if I change the schema definition in my code, then it will just change the schema for me. I don't need to go and hand run a query to do a migration or an alter table or something like that. It will just do that for me behind the scenes. Or
Yeah.
Yep.
We operate with a declarative schema, essentially. So that is the source of truth. It's co-located with your code. It doesn't necessarily ship with your app code. It is sort of like a first-class resource in SQL Connect. So yeah, that's the source of truth. So you do have to change that. But we do the migrations and write the DDL.
Got it. But you change that in your code base, and you don't have to go to a separate console, or because I just feel like every time I've written a SQL app, I've had to go almost to a separate UI to run the alter table query to get the table into the state that I know I want it. And now you're saying I don't need to do that anymore.
You don't need to do that. So we detect the deltas for you, and we also detect if these are simpler migrations or something that could impact your data, and then we warn you. And that's a choice that you need to take, whether you want to still proceed with the migration or not.
Can you show us the schema for this application?
Sure. Let's go backwards maybe. So let's look at the schema. So the schema for this, it's a project management app. So there's a project entity, there's a task entity, there is we also support comments on tasks.
And Peter already knows what I'm going to ask. Can you zoom in just a little bit?
Yeah.
Command plus.
Is that the way? Okay. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Maybe one more time.
That'd be great.
Okay. Yep, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so here we have a project and a task. So maybe let's look at the task first, right? Because that is the thing that we saw on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it looks like we're defining a task and say this is a table, and then there is lots of properties in there.
Yep.
So what is the meaning of, so all the different data types, that's kind of clear, but what's the meaning of the exclamation mark?
So this is, our origins are in GraphQL. So we do use GraphQL to define your schema.
Mm-hmm.
And the exclamation point means this is a required field.
Mm-hmm.
Where in this case, the assigned to doesn't have that exclamation. So it's an optional field.
Mm-hmm.
So this is when your column is nullable or not nullable, right?
Okay.
And behind the scenes, this is getting translated into a SQL table for you by SQL Connect.
Very cool.
Cool. And then we can look at the query since we are here. So let's look at the add task mutation actually.
Sorry, one more time. Go back to
sure.
the schema because this I just think is so cool. So am I imagining it correctly where if I say delete the created at or the assigned to, and I just delete that line and then I push it, or do I run a command from the Firebase CLI? How do I update my schema in that way?
You can run a command from Firebase CLI to deploy the changes. If you're testing it locally in the emulator, those changes get picked up automatically. You don't need to do anything.
Got it.
But if you're pushing it to your server, it's an explicit you need to deploy, and at that point we'll detect if these are scary changes or whether they can be applied.
And can I guess what a scary change is? Is a scary change, hey, I deleted a table and another table has a dependency on that table, or like foreign keys in that
Correct.
table? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
There's
So
lots of scary changes. They're mostly
yeah, especially like in a relational DB, right, where you have relationships between entities.
Totally.
So that's something which is very cool that we do, is we warn you about the changes you're making.
Did you say they're mostly scary changes?
No.
Am I?
Well, no, sorry. I'm like working through some schema projects right now, and I always want things to be easy for onboarding, right? But like
Totally.
sometimes the same mechanisms that exist for onboarding exist for production, right?
Mhm.
And when you're designing software, and so I would love for developers to be able to like freely modify their schema,
Yeah.
and but we're also trying to protect them if those are bad changes. So like that's something I'm trying to figure out right now, is like how to signal, like how to balance that. And it does feel like there's, I don't want when you're just messing around and trying out the product and we're like, oh my God, you have cascading deletes because you're dropping this table. Like, so we have overrides, or like, yes, this is fine.
Well, yeah, that is what I was going to ask about too. So if I delete lines 31 through 40, and I assume that there are no foreign keys, there are no other dependencies, does it go ahead and say like, yep, I guess we're fine, and drop the table? Or is that a scary change and it alerts you and says, no, hey, just so you know, before you do this, you're about to drop the table? Where is that line?
So in the when you deploy it, it's going to show you the changes you're making, and if they are scary, then it's going to warn you.
And is scary the technical term? Because I'm going to keep using
No,
it.
the scary.
I think we say severe, maybe.
Yeah. So that's something I just came up with right now. I was trying to find words for it.
Let's get the team. We're working on this API right now, the schema migration. Let's get scary. Let's shoehorn that in as a severity warrant.
Okay. All right. Sorry. You've tried to go back to the other file multiple times, and Peter and I got too excited and interrupted you. But yeah. Okay. We're ready.
That's okay. So let's look at the queries. And I think we had the get tasks query. That's what was getting refreshed automatically. So when would this query refresh is like if there's a task that gets added, if something is getting updated or deleted, right? And Marissa mentioned this. So this is what the developer, or in this case, the agent that I white coded this with, has added. It's correctly detected, that this query needs to be refreshed on whenever there's a create task, update, or delete. With create, it it adds a quick check, like am I adding to the right project? So the mutation that adds a task also has to specify what project it's getting added to. And we want this query only refreshed if the project ID of the task getting created matches what's subscribed to, right? So if I've subscribed to project ABC and a task is getting added to project DEF, I don't want this query refreshed. And that's the condition that's being specified here is my project ID matching the mutation project ID?
So if I don't provide this condition, it would always refresh.
Yes.
On any create task, even
any
if.
Create task.
So back to our restaurant, it's like if anyone orders the same salad I ordered, like I'm getting a new salad, as opposed to saying no, only for table.
I would not mind that.
Only for table 19. That's like what the function of that equivalency, that expression is saying.
And what happens if if there is a typo, or so if I don't know, like instead of writing project ID with an uppercase I, accidentally I use a lowercase I.
I think SQL Connect server will detect that as an error because we
Mhm.
will not find a matching variable and we'll flag it. But I have a feeling that might happen at runtime though. I'm not 100% sure right now.
Yeah, right now it's not going to go in and parse the string and determine that there's an error in this condition.
I think yes. I'm not sure honestly about that. I think it's more of a runtime check.
Yeah.
So the thing that I am thinking about all of this time is, so we are here in our IDE and we write code, and let's be honest, the schema definition and those queries are code. And then at one point, we either need to have a runtime layer that's able to interpret what's going on here, or we need to have some sort of generator which produces an output. So, and then part of that code needs to run on the client and another part needs to run on the server. So if I understood you correctly, Marissa, there is kind of like something running on the server, which is listening to which order, which table ordered which salad, to stay in the kitchen metaphor, in order to be able to send that update to the respective client. So I'm wondering, when I write this query here and then I save, what happens? This is, I imagine there's some, a level of magic going on.
Yeah, well, I should clarify, when you're running, if you're working locally, like Ashish mentioned with your emulator, save. But like queries are infrastructure in Data Connect, say in SQL Connect. We still do it. It's fine. A lot of things are still called. We don't want to make a breaking change for a name change, so there's a lot of things still called Data Connect. It's one of the pains of renaming. But anyways, you have to deploy because it's on the server. It's stored. But yeah, you're asking. I mean, like, I'm not going to speak to the back end, and I don't know if Ashish wants to either. But yeah, there's some magic that happens that does the sort of the mapping. And yeah.
So I think one of the things we were talking about was how your declared schemas convert into SQL tables, and your queries and mutations, they get converted into API endpoints for you. These are accessible using REST if you wanted to. So imagine if you're writing an app yourself, you would have a database, and then you're going to build some layer that creates API endpoints to serve that data or manipulate that data. And we are doing that. We're doing that for you. All you have to do is declare your SQL queries, and when it gets deployed, these become basically endpoints. And they are secured based on the auth that you specify and the conditions that you specify. You can specify conditions in the auth directive too, to do further checks on who the user is that's coming in. So that's what I think, Marissa, I mean, like, queries are infrastructure. So because this query is an endpoint called get tasks.
So when you deploy, you're changing those API endpoints. So do you need to kind of deploy the app here as your backend at the same time as you deploy it to the store? Sorry, I'm not an app developer. I'm a web developer. And so I'm imagining, like, how do you time your deployments so that your APIs are still functioning? Or do you need to make sure, like, this is backwards compatible in some way with the new deployment that I'm rolling out to the front end to the client? Does that make sense? If it's an API, it's got two sides. How do you keep those in sync?
You would, and Ashish, feel free to weigh in, but you would have to create like an additional query. I mean, anytime you're making change, right, in any database changes, right, there's always like a 10-step process, right? So some of that still applies, even though we try to make it easier. But like, you would republish. I think you would probably have a new query in that case if you had to change a query, so that your apps still work. And then you start to migrate your app code over to that new I think of it like your backend. I mean, it's managed. It's a
Totally.
managed backend. So this query file, it's co-located with the project, but it's not tied to it in any way. Like this would you can co-locate the code, just like Firebase. Well, Firebase functions is simply you can deploy it separately or together. That's up to you in terms of how you structure your folders. But in practice, you want to deploy your queries and then migrate your app code, and then slowly, maybe eliminate old queries.
And is that, if we call this a backend deployment, essentially, do you always do that from the command line, or is there a way to do that from like a CI/CD pipeline or from GitHub directly? I'm not sure if that question makes sense.
It's right now I think it's a CLI command.
Okay. All right.
So in my case, when I was white coding this, not this, but the other app we'll show you, the agent was actually every time I requested a change, it would modify the queries, create my Swift or modify my Swift app, and then it would deploy the queries automatically to the server as part of that flow. So it wasn't a loop where I would ask it to make changes to a query, it would change it, deploy it, change my Swift app, and I would just be running the app from Xcode basically.
Oh, that's cool. All right. So, I feel like you prepped a demo for us and I keep interrupting you.
No, that's
Sorry,
okay.
I'm just getting excited.
Interesting questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one more question about that. So it sounds like when you are working on a production app at one point and you're making changes, then you probably want to version your queries, right? So if you're making a change and that requires rolling out a completely different query, to me it sounds some of that you might be able to get away with without changing the client, because the shape of the data is the same. But as soon as the shape of the data or the behavior changes in a significant way, you would want to have a version A and a version 1, a version 2, a version 3 of your query rolled out to the backend, so that your clients can use whichever query they were built for and then slowly migrate towards the most recent version of your backend. Is that a correct understanding? And how would you do that? So for example, if I wanted to have a second version of the get tasks query here.
So I think you said it correctly. As long as the data shape stays the same, generally your SDKs are able to parse the responses and work with the data. You could change this query. You could change, and so in this case particularly, right, if you wanted to further change the where clauses out here, you could change them without any impact to the client. So that's one advantage of a server control query is like, maybe not in this case, but suppose there was some issue you ran into and you wanted to alter the query, so you're controlling the data that's flowing down to the client. As long as the shape stayed the same, you could just redeploy the query with the new where clause, and your clients would start to receive different data as long as the shape is same. If your shape changes and your SDKs are not able to parse the shape right, I think that's when you want to version it, probably.
Ashish, I haven't fielded this specific question or run into this with my demo apps. Would you use the connector to point to different versions, or would you simply? One thing to note is like the naming in SQL Connect is up to you. Like we have a queries.gql file. That's arbitrary. You have a place where you specify like which files to watch and what you care about. So potentially, anyways, you have that flexibility. You don't have to call it like get tasks too, in order.
You could call it any name that you want.
Well, what I'm saying is that you could like duplicate the file.
Yeah.
And do it at the file level if you wanted to version all of your queries. You have a lot of flexibility on like sort of how you point to which files for us to pay attention to.
So let me see if I can recap this. If I am using the same shape I can just edit the Git tasks and then move on. If I'm going to change the shape, then rather than changing it in place, I would add a new API, or a new file. I would write it there. Future versions would point to that one, and then eventually I might deprecate this old one, and then all right, that makes sense to me.
Right. It's like you would do with any other app, right? If
Totally.
if the API endpoint is changing what data it's returning, the shape of the data, then you can't call that with old code.
Totally.
So,
the query is kind of functioning like it's what's creating, like Ashish mentioned, like the endpoint. So you can almost think of it like, how would you, if you change an API?
Yeah. And as long as the shape of that API is the same. Yeah, so it functions just the same. I don't know. For some reason in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe there's some more SQL, like Firebase SQL magic that's happening here that solves all the world's problems. And this isn't quite doing all of that. Very cool. This is great.
Yeah, I think if your data shape is changing, that's a business choice, right? Like you have decided that, hey, something needs to change out here for whatever reasons, and then at that point, the old code's not going to work.
Totally.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, one of the things of Data Connect used to be that you write your queries or your schema, and then it would automatically create a type-safe SDK for you. So is that still the same, or have there been any changes with the name change?
We do. So type safety needs us type specifications, and that is hard with SQL, because SQL queries, like in this case, the SQL query is not returning all fields. So inferring types from this is hard. So the Gen SDKs still work, but the Gen SDKs are much better if with a GraphQL query, because in a GraphQL query, we know exactly what types are getting returned. And we can generate the SDKs more tuned to that type specification. In SQL, we still use the Gen SDKs. There's some niceties around them, so they create customized queries for you. So this becomes like a get tasks query for you. It feels like a function called get tasks with the project ID. So there's still advantage to using Gen SDKs, because you get all your queries, named queries, as if you're making SDK calls locally.
Do you want to show, should we jump over to that?
So let's look at this, right? So we saw the get tasks query. In my tasks view, what I did was I got a ref to that query. And the ref is basically, if you're a Swift developer, you know what the observation framework is. Any SwiftUI view typically needs to be backed by an observation provider. And what we are doing, so that's one thing that Gen SDK still do for you, is they're creating observation-enabled queries. So this get tasks query is behind the scenes and observation. So it adds that observation macro, or that observable, I think, so the advantage is, like, when you subscribe to this, what we do is we start a real-time stream for you for this query. So as the data changes, as the SQL Connect servers are sending you updated data, the queries in Swift world are getting updated, and this query is bound to different UIs out here. So there should be a for loop somewhere. It's a project name, and then if we go down, so this is where it's getting all of the tasks, and it is basically iterating through and showing you all of the tasks.
Can you scroll up a little bit so we can see how it's doing the mapping?
Sure.
Okay.
So this is the ref that we had. The data variable is what changes as the query changes automatically for you. So it's very nice in the Swift world, where real-time automatically updates the server data for you. And with Swift observation, once we update the data variable, your UIs get updated automatically because they are bound to this. So you get the tasks and this list. That's how the UI automatically changed for you there.
Okay, so if I understand line 78 correctly, it is subscribed to my ref, and then I use this underscore select thing, and then I do a compact map, which basically throws out all of the nil objects, and then I try to map the data to a task model, and that is my Swift struct, right? And so
Yep.
the task model could have any shape. So I could have fields on there that are marked as optional, and if the data that arise from my ref does not include the field, for example, let's say color, maybe I wanted to colorize my tasks, so I don't receive a color from the database, it would not be filled, and then my UI would have to be resilient to not having this piece of data in order to prevent crashing, but that shouldn't be a big issue, right? So what I'm trying to get at is, it looks to me as if we get lots of flexibility by not having a rigid automatic mapping from the data that we receive from the database to the data model in the application.
Yes. Yeah, I think with GraphQL, you get very strictly typed objects. With SQL, you're basically getting JSON data back. And you can basically, so in this case, if you're, like you said, the task model, if you kept your fields optional, then it becomes very flexible, where if a field is missing, if I change my query and don't return a field, then my model is still resilient and it won't crash my UI.
Yeah, that's very nice. So what is the underscore select property?
So that is a field that if you go back to this, that's basically mapping to this. You can rename this to whatever you want. So if I wanted to, I could alias this as this. And now I would get tasks out there instead of select. So this is something
select a function, or
select is a built-in call from SQL Connect that lets you run arbitrary SQL.
Okay.
So this is a very simple SQL query right now. It's selecting the task ID and mapping aliasing some of the fields there.
You said select allows you to run an arbitrary query. So does select need to be select, or it could literally be anything?
No, I think this is a SQL Connect function.
There's no. They're limited. You can only
okay
like read.
Okay.
For queries, mutations.
Good to know.
Can have.
Yeah, sorry. This is predefined SQL. The select in this case is a read query. Thanks for clarifying, Bruce. I meant like your query within this can be any complex select query.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure every time we select, we just drop the tasks table.
And the other thing, so I think that this might be very important. Where does the query live? Is the query baked into my client application, or does it only live on the server?
The query lives on the server.
Okay, so it's never on my client. So even if Luke wanted to hack my application, and whenever I tried to fetch my tasks, it would drop the table, then that would be impossible because the query lives on the server and Luke doesn't have access to that. He doesn't have the keys to the data center. That's
correct. Yeah, this query lives on the server. SDKs or clients only see an API endpoint that is secured by the auth. What's happening within is this. That's not known to the clients. So that's why, like initially, when we said that this query you could change on the server, as long as your data shape is resilient enough to clients are resilient enough to handle the data shape that's coming back.
One thing I hadn't thought about is you've got the auth decorator up there. Is that also deployed when you deploy basically this HTTP endpoint? It deploys the auth, and can that auth be more sophisticated as well? Like I'm jealous, I think, because we've got Firestore rules, right? And every time I want to go to Firestore rules, I have to update it manually, or I need to run the command from the CLI. But here, does it get deployed with the rest of the deployment? Wow, that's cool.
So
I like
the
that.
auth is basically telling it's securing that particular query or the endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it's very simple, purposefully kept simple to explain it, but you can add conditions to the auth to further filter who accesses this API endpoint, right? So I think there might be I might have some examples in the other app where we add some conditions to the auth.
And is the thing that makes this real time, is it the at refresh decorators? Without those,
Yes.
would it just be okay?
So without those at refresh decorators, this query is you would execute this or have to reload the query. With the at refresh, it tells the server that, hey, if a client subscribes, then I can start pushing data down based on the conditions specified here.
And does your client code change pretty significantly based on whether it's a one-time call or a subscription?
No, they're two different calls. So
Okay.
subscribe is a separate call. Execute. So if you want to one-time execute a query, it's execute. If you want to get updates on it, you subscribe to it. You can still subscribe to a query that's not declared with that refresh, but it just won't update, right?
Got it.
And one of the reasons we designed it that way is we are working to make more Firebase magic. Like, for instance, if you update a single row, any queries for that row that you've subscribed to automatically refresh. Like, we don't make you write the really simple conditions, like where it's just, there's no real fan out, there's no risk. Like, it's like, yeah, if a single entity is updated and someone's querying that single entity, it's automatically real time. And we're trying to expand constantly kind of our like more Firebase like magic. So I look at, anyways, but yes, like, so that's why you subscribe, and then there's the the conditions over here.
Well, even that one is interesting to me, because what if I've got a select statement where I'm selecting this row and I'm just selecting this single entity, but I'm not selecting that specific column, and a column I'm not selecting is updated. How eager is it? Like, does it figure that? I know I'm asking you like a very low level question. Maybe
no, I know. I think in that case it would update.
It would. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's simple enough. It's probably not going to lead to a whole bunch of extra reads, but does that?
Yeah, exactly.
What I thought of when you said it update, anytime it updates the row, the entity will get that read back. Okay.
But you're kind of highlighting the advantage of you're bought into like the manual approach, because this is happening all the time in other real-time products. Like you're getting updates, like they're very active. And I think as a not new developer, but like when the app is new, you're like, great, it works. It's super snappy. You don't run into like the sort of the cost or like the efficiency problems till you have a lot more usage. And then you maybe want to sort of have like peek under the hood and say like, how is this actually happening? And then maybe you're structuring your data in a way that makes sense for real time, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Again, it's that question of like SQL bringing complexity up front, but having like, I'll just take up you seemed interested in our auth directive. Sometimes I've been around Firebase for 7 years, and I know like when this SQL team formed, like there's a lot of people from the security team that worked on Firebase rules and people from other databases. Like there's definitely some institutional knowledge of pitfalls like going into this product and how it works. So I think the auth directive specifically is like a super powerful and elegant solution. So definitely like check it out.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Okay. I know we had 11, so I wanted to switch over to the more complex SQL example here. So this is a very simplified ride-hailing flow where you have a passenger that requests, searches for nearby drivers, and then picks a driver, and then the driver drives up to the passenger. It's been dumbed down a little, so it's not going to cover everything, but I wanted to use this to show a few things. One is these queries are more complex than the simple task list use case. The other part is this one also uses Postgres. I think it's the PostGIS extension. So you can run, you can run geo queries. And what this is trying to show you is that you can make geo queries also real time
Wow.
with
That's
Postgres.
very cool.
Yeah.
So let's look at the demo first. If hopefully it should work well. Okay.
Okay, so I, as the driver, I'm now logged in on the right side. Oh, I said I am not available.
Wait, I think this is not reset at this state.
Okay.
Let me just restart this. Sorry, I'm simulating some of the stuff out here because it's hard to get everything working. But
Yeah, this seems like a very sophisticated demo. You said you built both of these demos this morning, or?
no. The ride hailing I built a couple of days back, but it's also white code. Like it's coded with agents.
Got
so I
it.
used anti-gravity for internal version of anti-gravity for both.
Well, thank you so much for building that simpler app, because Peter and I were still fascinated, and and there was a lot to it. So even though it was simpler, there was
Yeah.
still a lot there. That
I really
we had
liked how
questions about.
snappy it was.
Yeah, that was very cool. And I think I caught that that's happening partially because it's on the emulator, but how responsive is it when we talk about real time and you've actually got it deployed with Firestore? It seems like it's about a second. With SQL Connect, is it about that same time frame or a little bit different?
I don't have numbers, but it's definitely less than a second.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fast because we're not really, it's in like the data connect. Like if we're looking at an architecture diagram, right, there's like the app, and then there's like the sort of SQL Connect layer, and then there's the database, and we're watching for these mutations. And as soon as we're sort of aware of them, we can send the refresh.
Yeah.
So it's very low latency in that sense. I will, like, just in the sense of full transparency, the limitation with this type of real time is that changes made out of band to your database are not, if you don't, you can use our admin SDK, but if you have, jobs running that change data overnight, like those might not get picked up unless we have to be sort of made aware of them. It's like a parking garage. Like we watch what's going in and out, but if like there's another exit, like we don't know. Like,
got it. Is the parking garage in the restaurant kitchen, or is the kitchen?
Yeah, and what's the third metaphor that we're going to hear about today?
Look, I have an art background, okay? So we gotta make everything physical.
That's great.
Me and Luke are out here.
Yeah, we're just not having our comp sci degrees.
I love it.
We were talking about that before. I think the call started. Like you don't have a computer science degree.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same. Yeah.
Cool. So let's try this. So I clicked. My driver said that I'm available for rides. To take passengers, and the view on the left immediately refreshed. Like it's the passenger here is looking for drivers, and it shows there's someone available. So the passenger now can request a ride from this driver, and the moment the passenger does that, the driver gets a request. That there's a ride request. The driver accepts it, and the ride basically starts. So on the left-hand side, it's telling the passenger, hey, this driver is accepted. This is the part which is simulated now because I'm hard-coded locations from, and then the pickup points. So if the driver says, so I'm going to simulate the ride, basically we are updating hard-coded locations, but those locations are getting pushed down in real time to the passenger.
That's very cool.
Yeah, this demo is awesome.
Really nice. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So it's done, and that's part of it. Like I have, this is the very simplified use case. So I start the trip and I complete the trip.
Okay.
Then I rate the driver.
5-star rating, would recommend.
Yeah. That's it.
Teleportation service was excellent.
So
I mean,
Real-time
traveling at light speed,
travel.
not bad.
Yeah.
yes.
It's even more than real time. It's light speed.
Yeah. Fire. This is our new product, everyone. Yeah.
I would be happy
Drive.
to build. Yeah, I'd be happy to build out the UI for that. The back end seems like there'd be some complexity for sure.
But we are handling all of that for you, right? We are handling the real-time streams for you. We are making even the geo queries out here real time. All of those interactions were for real-time subscribe queries. So when the driver says I'm available, there's a mutation that's running. And there's a query out here, get nearby drivers. We look at the query. It's get nearby drivers that has that refresh directives for nearby drivers. So let's take a quick look at that.
Can we take a look at that? I'm really curious.
So, okay, I need to plus.
And again, thanks for making it larger.
So let's look at the query out here. This is this is the one. So this is again a slightly complex query. The auth level has been purposely kept only at user, and we add an insecure reasons because we want to know any driver that's there, any logged in driver, right? So it's still locked to a logged in user, but there's no further filters. So update driver presence. Now this is a little interesting. So we do, this is something the agent like Gemini actually suggested, was we added this additional condition out here, which is taking in the lat long and comparing it to the bounding box. Like we want to make sure that the driver is actually in my area of interest before I go and run a post GIS query, or before I go and run the geo query. So this condition checking happens on our servers. So you're not sort of pushing every query into Postgres. Geo queries are a little expensive, so in terms of compute. So, and then this is the example of a query where I was saying this is a pretty complex query. It's taking in the driver's presence, multiple driver presence. It is doing all kinds of joins with the user, the driver, and statuses, and then sending back a list of available drivers.
And can you scroll back up? When is the refresh happening?
The refresh happens whenever a driver updates their presence.
Okay.
And so the driver can, update, say I'm available, and then they can keep pushing their location. It also updates when the ride is accepted, because at that point I'm not looking for nearby drivers, but I've picked a driver. And then this is just an additional, I think the agent added this when the driver's profile updates. Maybe they changed the name or whatever, or if the rating changes. Icon.
Yeah, why not? I mean, like, when the ride-hailing app has a theme, right? So carnival or whatever theme.
Yeah. I don't know why. I was imagining some driver going through a name change process while giving you a ride just in the middle of that transition. That's very cool, though.
So I'll be just candid. I don't understand this query, okay? But agents are really good at writing SQL and really good SQL queries. There's 25 years of knowledge, 25 plus years of knowledge out there. So the Gemini basically wrote this query for me.
Very cool.
Come to speak of it, so trivia quiz for everybody on the stream and the people here. What does SQL actually stand for? And I'm not, asking about structured query language. Everybody knows that, I think. But where did it actually come from? And why do we say SQL? Anybody knows?
I feel like Peter's just showing off right now.
Yeah.
No.
I asked Gemini right before we went on the stream, and he told me. So SQL actually was the name of the original language, and it really stood for Structured English Query Language.
Huh.
And then
so was it SEQL?
Yes, like literally SQL. Like like a series. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Come to
if we
Firebase
just
after hours, you might get smarter.
that's great.
So
Cool.
what I
What a cool
found
demo.
really amazing, or something that I think we haven't talked enough about, is if you scroll up a little bit, where you can see all those refresh directives. So this means that you can granularly specify what are the conditions or the events when this operation or this query should be updated, right? So in the beginning, I thought, oh yeah, for sure, right? So you've got your SQL query in there, and that is the refresh condition. But here we can see that there are many other conditions. For example, whenever the driver updates their avatar, when you want to refresh and update this in real time, which is actually quite amazing. If you think about the amount of code you would have to write to make that happen, if you wanted to implement this manually, that is just insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just, I think I mentioned earlier, like if you wanted to just do reverse query matching on the, this query, it would like the sort of, you couldn't do it. Or like, it'd just be so hard to like watch all those data changes and then figure out, reverse engineer which queries care about them. So this is a way of sort of like with real time in any solution like out there, you're always trying to control the scope to limit, like there's like physical constraints at work. I think, connections and so yeah, I think this is a super clever solution. And even though, like I mentioned at the beginning, you do have to do a little bit more, you have to think about your app and how it works. The control is really nice.
It's so I mean, I'm looking at some of the other queries that Gemini generated, and these are like I can't even fathom what this is, honestly. So there's I think there's
that one we can
yeah. So like Marissa said, because we give controls to the developer to tell us the refresh conditions, we have the ability to take even complex queries like these and make them real time. This is something I feel pretty unique, I think, to SQL Connect.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So I've got two questions that we didn't touch on. So one of them is about the backend database. So if I understand correctly, that's Postgres. So my question is it possible to use any other type of database, SQL database? And then the other question is around client languages. So obviously here we've been using Swift, but what about Android developers and web developers? Do we have support for them as well?
Yeah. Marissa, you want to take the first one?
Sure. Ashish is the SDK guy, so I'll let him talk about SDKs. But so under the hood, I didn't do a great like what is SQL Connect, I'm realizing, but we've uncovered a lot about the product through this conversation. But it's based on Cloud SQL for PostgreSQL, and that is a sort of hard dependency. So it works well with Cloud SQL, and it's a Postgres only solution. If you have data in other sources, we do have an experimental feature called custom resolvers, which allows you to sort of join arbitrary data using a cloud function. So anyways, there is some of that sort of data connect vision at work there, where you can bring multiple data sources together. But largely no, we're leaning into Postgres. Postgres is very popular. Agents love it. People love it. Like that's really what we're trying to build here, is a Postgres solution for Firebase that works well with agents.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'll take
so
the other
if
one.
I had existing data in a Postgres database, it should be fairly straightforward to write the queries and connect my application to it. But if I have, let's say, if I use
If you
SQL
migrate to Cloud
Server,
SQL,
it might be
yeah.
more challenging because I would have to perform a migration into PostgreSQL first.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But what's nice is since we partner with Cloud SQL, they have a lot of tools for migrating, to obviously to their. So it is Postgres under the hood. Like it is not so in that sense, it's open and compatible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think like we were using the PostGIS extension here. We also support the PG vector extension if you wanted to run vector queries, and of course you also get full text that Postgres supports.
Nice.
So all of that, you can write SQL queries to do all of that now, and that's I think so it's Postgres again. For the SDK question, so I think again out here, just to call out, right, the real-time updates that you were seeing in the app, they were basically, you were getting query refs that are observation enabled, and those were bound into SwiftUI views. So in this case, it was a map control that was being used. So as the ref updated itself with real-time data, the UI was getting updated. There's very little glue code that the developer has to write now. You just need to bind to the right data variables and it should get updated. Regarding other languages, right? So just like we support Swift observation for SwiftUI, we have native support for Kotlin. For if you want to build hybrid apps, we have support for Flutter. And then web, of course, there's a broad range of support. So there's vanilla JavaScript, but we also support React, Angular. We also have some TanStack wrappers that are extensions that you can use. So there's very broad support for all of them, and they're all native to those languages SDKs. So as an example, right, for Kotlin, we support flows that will directly integrate with Compose views. For Flutter, the real time happens with, I think, subscription or stream controllers. So you can subscribe to those, and those, they'll keep the data updated for you. And then I think for JS, you would use React hooks, or for if you're using React, of course. So there's I think for each platform we picked what is the right thing that lets you bind into your UI, and the real time just starts to flow into your UI when you enable it.
So it sounds like same principles, but using the most popular and modern implementation on the respective platforms.
Yes. For iOS, I know this we were talking about Swift. So we do, if you're not building SwiftUI apps, but you're still on UIKit, you can still use the SDK. I think the latest version, or somewhere Apple started supporting observation in UIKit apps too. Either this year or last year, I think. And so you can still use our query refs because they're observation enabled in UIKit apps. And we also expose we expose a combined publisher. So you can still get you can get the data flowing through that.
Very nice.
So,
this was so cool. This was so fun. I learned so much. Thank you. I feel like if nothing else, I got a tutorial on exactly what this is. And yeah, that's really terrific. The real-time aspect is, I know that's the part you're excited about because this is new, but so much of this is new to me, that the auth and being able to write SQL queries directly inside of here, all of that is just so neat.
Yeah, and I think for both of these apps, right, since we wanted to tell you all about the native SQL features, we specifically only stayed with SQL here. But we still support GraphQL. It's not gone away. So if you wanted more structured output, you can use that. But if you're a SQL person, or if you're using AI agents that are more tuned to SQL, you can. I mean, this is all generated by Gemini. These queries,
So you wrote not a single line of code of what
I have
you
not
showed
written a
us
single
today.
line of code for either of these apps.
That is seriously impressive.
Yeah. You have to give them what I think the flow for me was like it gets a working app and then you have to tune it a little bit with instructions. But I was consciously trying to stay away from writing code.
Yeah.
And
cool.
it's I'm using what we use the internal version of anti-gravity. The model is 3.6 Flash.
Yeah.
But you're using our public skills, right? Like the data
Yes.
connect
Yeah, and
Firebase
so
skills.
that's correct.
Yeah.
I call that out, but yeah, you should install the Firebase agent skills. That completely changes everything. Like it wrote the auth code for me. It can set up, it can deploy the app. It can generate all of these queries. So it makes a huge difference. Like you can build an end-to-end Firebase app with this. And I mean the task app, the project management app I showed you, it was done literally today morning because I wanted a simpler
Like
app.
in this call, I think for most
I was actually like when we were setting up the call, I was just tuning the app a little bit.
Yeah. That's great.
I was just furiously trying to get it ready
Did
before
you
the call.
install any SwiftUI skills as well, or just the Firebase skills?
For this, I have not used SwiftUI skills.
Okay.
I gave it generic instructions like just follow SwiftUI best practices, make sure the UI is performant and follows whatever best practices Apple pushes out, whoever pushes out.
Yeah, that's nice.
But there are skills published, right? I think you've written about it, Peter. So
yeah. That's why I'm asking, right? So I from what I saw, the code looked really good, and I often have the impression if you don't also provide SwiftUI skills, then agents will oftentimes write slightly outdated SwiftUI code. So I would assume that the fact that this framework uses observation has a positive impact on the agent who realizes, oh yeah, we're using modern APIs here, so let's write modern SwiftUI code as well.
Yeah, one thing I did for iOS, like what I did was I had it create two separate Swift packages, like all of my UI is in a UI package.
Yep.
And this is the SDK, the Gen SDK, basically.
Yeah.
And then my Xcode app becomes like a little shim where all it's doing is instantiating a view from the UI SDK. I think the agents, I find they find it simpler to deal with Swift packages. They're open source and they're much more easier to change than trying to manipulate Xcode projects.
Yeah. This is fantastic. So we're almost at the end of the time that we put aside for this. So before I let you all go, where can people get started with this? What's the best place to download and start building their own ride-hailing task apps or whatever people want to build?
Yeah. I recommend checking out our docs and looking at our quick starts because they're like we have iOS and we have a AI-driven one, so you can sort of do what Ashish did and like fully kind of go agentic. I think that's the best place to get started. We also do have a console, which we didn't talk about at all today, but you can, if you want to sort of get started in that sort of familiar UI environment, and you can even generate schema there with Gemini, and you can generate operations as well, which are like the queries that you saw. So that's another option, but all paths lead to local, right? So I think getting started locally is the way to go.
Nice.
Though we do have a no-cost trial, right? That was introduced. So if you wanted
to, if you hadn't checked it out, or if you're familiar with the product, or if you looked at us before and are looking again, we have had some changes there. So yeah, you can try it out totally free. It's on what Firebase calls the Spark plans, which is the no credit card required plans, for 3 months. So yeah, definitely easy to get started in that sense.
Yeah. So the ride-hailing app was not running on the emulator, by the way. It was running on a prod service.
Oh.
And because the PostGIS extension is only supported on the server.
You couldn't.
On the server.
Could you install it locally?
The app is the
No,
Swift app is running local.
No, I was referring to the GIS extension.
No, it was enabled on the Cloud SQL instance.
Yeah. Okay.
So I had to log into the Cloud Console and enable the extension, the PostGIS.
Okay. Very cool. Luke,
Yeah.
do you have any last questions that you're burning to ask?
No, I got to ask all of them at the beginning. That's why Ashish took so long to get to the second app, because I couldn't stop asking my questions then. I cut the line completely and now I have nothing left. But thank you so much. This was really, really insightful.
No, it was great. I loved your questions. I'm sure other people, I've learned being at Google and in the roles that I've had, that if you have a question, probably a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
True. It was great.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and demonstrating this. I have to admit that between the last time that I saw a demo about Firebase Data Connect and this one, I think a lot has changed, and I'm really excited about those changes, and specifically about the real-time. I mean, it is one of the most magic features of Firebase in general, because if you have to implement it yourself, it's just so much work, and seeing it happen for literally not much code that you have to write yourself is just fantastic. So yeah, thanks for coming on and showing this to us. And also, Luke, thank you so much for being my new co-host, I guess. It was really great. And I look forward to the next one. And I don't know yet what we're going to talk about, but if people have suggestions, please drop them in the comments to this video. And if you've got any other questions that we didn't cover today, you can also drop them in the comments below. We'll keep on checking, and we'll keep answering in the comments. So the live stream and the live chat will stop in a couple of minutes after we conclude this stream, but the comments are still open. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks again for Ashish and Marissa to come on. And we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.